Hello, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Americas. Here's a look at today's show. Donald Trump may have won the presidential election, but his opponents are still not happy about it. More on the protests and his controversial choices so far on the way. There are a lot of U.S. political pollsters saying mea culpa these days. Our Washington correspondent will take a look at how so many of them got it wrong. And Canada rocked by scandal as police in Montreal are accused of tapping journalists' phones. This week, protests against President-elect Donald Trump cropped up across the United States. From New York to Atlanta to San Diego, thousands took to the streets to say dump Trump or build bridges, not walls. The protests have been largely peaceful, but there have been some clashes as well, like in the western city of Portland, Oregon. But the anti-Trump demonstrators are determined to make their voices heard.
We've elected a man who is a massive racist, misogynist, homophobe, every transphobe, every horrible thing you could think of. He's now running our country. I don't know how this happened. None of us know how, and it's disgusting.
Everyone here disagrees with Donald Trump. His ideas are dumb. We deserve a better president.
What I think a protest like this can do is send a message to others in the country who are upset with this new president and also internationally that Americans don't support his racist, sexist agenda.
Well, for more now, I'm joined on the set by Henry Landes, a U.S. analyst and professor at the elite Sciences Po University here in Paris. Henry, thank you so much for coming in. You're also the author of a book you wrote in French, which can be translated into Hello, Houston, the U.S. as seen by an angry American. Can you relate to what we just saw there a few moments ago?
Yeah, Americans are angry. They are disappointed that they have elected somebody who has very misogynistic, very xenophobic, very racist comments during the campaign, behavior as well. They're upset and worried about what kind of policies he's going to implement. Is he going to respect all Americans and be the president of all Americans like he says? Let's look at the first speech that he gave when he won. He said, now it's time to bind the wounds. And my message to him, and message I think of a lot of Americans to him, is you don't need to hurt the U.S. population that much during a campaign. Obviously, it was your political strategy, but we don't need to talk about people that way to have important and effective policies put into place. We don't need to say we're going to stigmatize a whole population and declare war against a religion. That's too simplifying of a fact. We didn't have a real debate, a political debate, in a world where politics is already very stigmatized and people are sick of it. So that's one of the reasons why they're upset and protesting, as they should be.
You talk about binding the wounds. What do you think about the choices Donald Trump has made so far in his cabinet, particularly the nomination of Stephen Bannon, the former head of the alt-right website Breitbart?
Well, for many, he is somewhat of a voice of racism in the transition team and in the White House. It is very worrisome for a lot of civil rights activists, for a lot of defenders of minority rights. It is probably not very positive. It's not a very positive signal in terms of the advancement of the LGBT community, of equality between women and men, for different minority rights. It is probably something that we are going to have to fight against. For those that want to see a relatively progressive platform for the next 4 years and build on the progress that we've made. Having a lot of people come out of poverty, having a lot of people be able to be on the radar and benefit from healthcare, benefit from being integrated in society. These are things that could be deconstructed if we don't have thinking that applies to all of Americans' well-being. That's what's important here. And so we don't want some fringe-minded thinking person to come in and give too much advice to the president. And we definitely hope that he's going to be the president of all Americans, and we will protest if he doesn't.
Let's talk a bit more about that protesting, because this cultural phenomena of protesting is very French. We see it a lot here in Paris. We don't see it so much in the United States. Do you think these protests will continue, or will they just peter out as we all get used to President Trump?
It depends on what he does. I don't think they will discontinue if he starts implementing policies such as going backwards, full speed on the environment, if he decides to be really a climate skeptic and completely ignore what we should be doing and transitioning out of fossil fuels and moving to renewable energies. If he does that, I think we'll see more protests. If he decides to come backwards on the rights of women and their right to choose and the right to control their bodies and their destiny, I think we will see more protests. I think we will see more protests if he comes back on these, because this is an unprecedented election. This is an election where really somebody just put forward straightforward, misogynistic, xenophobic xenophobic and racist proposals and speech. And so we should see protests. The Americans, yes, they protest a little bit less than France. There was a strong movement against unions starting in the 1980s with Ronald Reagan, and we saw that for the next 35 years. You can see basically a downward spiral of participation in unions in the private sector. That has something to do with it. But let's not forget that there was a very strong civil rights movement in the United States. There was a very strong environmental movement in the 60s and 70s as well. And I think it's about time that if we all of a sudden put forward some retrograde policies because of the Trump administration, I think it's about time we see another civil rights movement, basically on public health, social equality, and on environmental protection.
All right. Thank you so much for that, Henry Landis, for coming in and taking the time to speak to us
Been a
here
pleasure.
on Inside the Americas. Well, 1 week after one of the biggest political upsets in U.S. history, if not the biggest, the U.S. is coming to terms with this new reality of President Donald Trump, a reality that very few had predicted, including those who get paid to make those calls. The polls just got it wrong, and those who put them together are now keeping a pretty low profile. So does the Trump win mark the end of the opinion poll in the U.S.? France 24's Washington correspondent Philip Crowther found out.
Getting the outcome of a presidential election wrong is every pollster's nightmare. Donald Trump's surprise march to the White House was predicted by almost nobody. Daniel Cox runs opinion polls. He reluctantly admits that mistakes were made.
Trying to figure out who's going to show up is incredibly difficult. And this year, there was a lot more uncertainty than I think was really modeled in some of the predictions.
There are others who have also come away red-faced from the 2016 election. Washington's myriad of communication strategists depend on studies and polls, and they too were fooled.
The sobering fact for all of us is you have to look at data with a grain of salt. I mean, we all know this. We all know that there are margins of error in polling. I think a lot of folks ignore that, and I think that that certainly is something that we all have to think about when we're looking at data.
Among the other actors in this comedy of errors are we ourselves. Those of us who covered the campaign and the race for the White House every day followed the polls and predicted the wrong outcome. For example, Latinos and women were expected to help Hillary Clinton win the key swing states. We all got that one wrong.
This was all pretty conventional wisdom that turned out to be completely incorrect. Just because we misunderstood the kind of scope and scale of anger over the establishment and politics in general.
The American Association for Public Opinion Research has set up a committee to study the 2016 election. It's expected to come up with first results in May, but after this election, studies and polls might fall on deaf ears.
Next now to Canada with a story that's taken the country by storm. It's come out that several journalists' phones were allegedly tapped, and by no less than the Montreal police. The Canadian press is furious. Politicians are outraged. Even Edward Snowden himself has weighed in. Pierre Millet and Katia Lucia Berger report.
This scandal broke out because of revelations from the newspaper La Presse. At the end of October, Patrick Lagacé, one of its star journalists, found out that his phone was tapped between January and July 2016. The Montreal police bugged Lagacé's phone on suspicion that one of his informants within the force was corrupt.
I'm furious, journalistically furious. There aren't many cases in which the police asked for and obtained legal authorization to snoop on journalists. But in my case, it was done not for national security matters, but rather somewhat insignificant criminal activity.
This scandal has blown up since it emerged, capturing the attention of foreign media. Famed whistleblower Edward Snowden also spoke about it at a recent video conference hosted by Montreal University. Local news has since revealed that 5 other Quebec journalists' phones were also tapped in the past few years. Amongst them, Marie-Maude Denis. She is the co-host of Enquête, an investigative journalism show on Canada's public broadcaster.
This is where we film the show every Friday.
She is furious. Her work is largely reliant on her anonymous sources.
There are people who revealed very important things to me which allowed us to produce public interest investigative pieces. I spent time and energy to convince them that I would protect them. What the police did, in a sense, destroys that, because now my sources will say, sure, you'll protect me, but there's always a chance that the cops are listening.
Given the scandal's scope, politicians are concerned. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that he is very worried and he defines himself as a defender of the free press. The problem here is that the political class could have done something to prevent this.
A law to protect journalistic sources has been under review for over a year at the National Assembly of Quebec, and the issue hasn't progressed. The law also doesn't do enough to protect sources, and the amendments brought forth by the Association of Professional Journalists are not being considered. So we are questioning how seriously the authorities are addressing this problem.
The police is not issuing any statements. The only thing that is set in stone is that an internal audit on the province's 3 main police forces has been launched by the Quebec government.
Well, that wraps it up for this Inside the Americas. We thought we'd leave you, though, with something a little bit light. Here is a look now at some of the funniest make-believe chats seen on the internet between Barack Obama and his eternal number 2, Vice President Joe Biden. Enjoy.